There's a lot of things in Reanimal that feel familiar. A little too familiar.
You are nothing but an imitation.
I've loved the Little Nightmares franchise since 2017, and I absolutely adored playing through Reanimal. And while playing through Reanimal, I noticed a lot of things that felt incredibly familiar to the first two mainline Little Nightmares games. So I thought it'd be cool to point those out, give my opinions, and glaze Tarsier Studios. I'll also be pointing out what's different between two aspects of games where appropriate. This video should be going a lot further than just, oh, they're both 2.5D puzzle horror games made by the same studio. Don't worry, it'll hopefully be more specific than that. Anyways, what's up with Tarsier Studios and the freakishly proportioned tall creepy men in hats? Specifically, I want to talk about the Sniffer and the Janitor, because they serve extremely similar roles in their respective games. First of all, there's the design similarities. They've both got incredibly off-putting faces, which is par for the course for these games, fancy hats, and dried out bland colors for their attire. It's pretty easy to boil them down to just big creepy dudes with cool hats. But it actually goes a whole lot deeper than that. They're both the first big monsters you actually encounter, and they sort of serve as the tutorial enemy for the rest of the game. In their respective games, I'm pretty sure they're actually the monsters with the most active screen time. If you've ever seen a Little Nightmares speedrun, you'd notice how a majority of it is dedicated to the Janitor's lair and having to deal with him specifically. This kind of pacing lines up pretty well with the Sniffer. Now besides maybe the Lamb, I'm pretty sure the Sniffer is the monster which has the most active time between when you first have to avoid them and when you get them off your back. Gameplay wise, there's not all too much to point out between them besides the usual Tarsier sneaking around and occasional chase. However, there is something to be said about the parallels between the two environments, being the prison/lair and small forest town respectively. When in these environments, you get this overwhelming sense of intrusion and intimidation. In both games, you can tell this environment wasn't made for you. Although, I think you can feel this best with the Janitor's lair and Little Nightmares in general. The environments are purposely stretched and impossible looking, specifically proportioned to make you look more like a rat than a child. The environment is one which only the Janitor can feasibly traverse. His impossibly long arms which act as portable ladders for the areas only he can reach. There's zero accommodation for you or anybody else, because the Janitor is the only creature that roams at this level of the Maw. So it's specifically crafted for the convenience of him, and only him. This creates an incredible sense of tension, where on a first playthrough, you don't know when that bald blind bastard's gonna suddenly pop in. For the Sniffer's environment, this is definitely felt at a lesser degree, but is still a shared aspect worth pointing out. The world of Reanimal is a lot more tangible, less surreal than that of Little Nightmares. This doesn't feel like a surreal nightmare this time around, it's more like an invasion. The buildings and structures still mostly feel realistically sized and proportioned, but that sense of foreboding is still there, like urban exploring an old abandoned place you used to frequent as a kid, only to find out some violent homeless dude has made it his home and set up booby traps everywhere. That's the kind of feeling you get with the Sniffer. The dead bodies that are strewn about basically act as fast travel points for the Sniffer, like it's some sort of twisted game to him. The small forest town specifically feels like a playground for the Sniffer, get it? He's in control of everything out here. In the game, it looks like he's at least helping create the skin suits and boomers found everywhere, which adds to the idea that this area is his domain, no one else's, and you're no exception. Man, talking about all these beast holes is giving me nostalgia. I just can't put my finger on where it's coming from though. Both of these characters are generally bad, I think we can agree on that. However, I think the Sniffer comes off as a lot more malevolent. I think this is a difference worth pointing out between these characters because it pretty clearly demonstrates the shift in direction between Little Nightmares and Reanimal. Also, I kind of just think it's interesting. The Janitor in Little Nightmares 1 definitely implied a lot of things, but he seemed to mostly just be following orders, or simply just thought of you as a pest that needed to be eliminated. The animations and characterization of the Janitor never really imply that he took, like, enjoyment out of trying to kill Six or anything like that. This is directly contrasted by the Sniffer. In Reanimal, it feels like he gets some sort of sick enjoyment out of his time with us. Like, man, why else would he be doing the absolute most for zero reason here? The only reason we live here is because we go under this little opening right here, and then he proceeds to squeeze through an opening that's like 3 times smaller. Guys, he's fucking with us. There's no way he's not.
You fucking with me, right?
He clearly has a job that he's doing, seen from the various chores we see him perform throughout the town, but to what extent or what means he's trying to achieve is unknown. The death animation for the janitor, if you can like really call it that, just has him grabbing you and doing that thing. You know, his thing. Meanwhile, the sniffer really puts that mature rating to work. I think this is one of the most clear examples of the direction shift between Little Nightmares and Reanimal. Little Nightmares was operating under Bandai Namco, you know, Pac-Man guys, who presumably wanted Tarsier to aim for a teen rating rather than a mature. The original vision for the game actually included depictions of 6 being torn in half and such, but changes were made so as to appease the age rating while adding more mystique by leaving whatever happens to 6 up to the imagination of players. However, I don't know how much is being left up to the players' imaginations in cases where this is the last you see of 6. This honestly worked really well in favor of Little Nightmares. The game didn't need over-the-top brutalization to be effective in its horror. There's already so many terrible things in play that you don't need to see what happens to 6 in order to know what happens to 6. Yeah. The sniffer doesn't care about any of that. This dude will chomp your head off, snap your back in 2, and drown you.
It's the fucking money, shithead!
Honestly, I think THQ Nordic, seeing the success of the Little Nightmares franchise, was definitely a lot more keen to just let Tarsier do whatever they wanted in this game, which led to really kick-ass death scenes like this. It's not over the top for the sake of being over the top. And the sniffer rips your head off because he'd rip your fucking head off, you know? There's a bunch of other strange little parallels between these two as well. Both of them have fates where it isn't confirmed whether or not you necessarily kill them, but you definitely deal a significant amount of damage. The most we really know about these two characters' fates is that, well, I mean, both their arms certainly hurt after the ordeal. Another thing, their name should definitely be switched around. For a guy whose name is the Sniffer, I didn't hear him sniffing around all too often. Meanwhile, Roger over here sounds like his Discord e-kitten just broke up with him with all this sniffling about. The last similarity I want to point out between the two is their overall touchiness. For the janitor, you know, this kind of makes sense. He's blind, so he has to feel around to find you and understand the room that he's in. It doesn't make it any less unsettling, but at least he has a reason for it. Yeah, the sniffer doesn't have any of that. The sniffer's awfully, touchy with various items and characters in the game. He doesn't have any real excuse for it. He isn't blind or anything. He's just creepy like that. This could lead us to drawing a few conclusions.
There's a lot of kids around here. We just heard adult kids playing there.
Where?
What do you mean, where?
Overall, I think that's just about all I have to say about both of these characters. I think it's really cool how Tarsier inadvertently exhibited the similarities and differences between these two games to two functionally identical enemies. Even though these two characters serve extremely similar introductory roles, their individual quirks and characterization act as testaments to the differing creative visions for their respective games. Different production circumstances were in play when creating both of these guys, so it's really cool to see how that directly affected their behavior and what they were allowed to do. In the end, I just really like these guys. Tarsier always knocks it out of the park when it comes to their enemy designs, and these two are certainly no exception. Hey, this is me a good while after editing together this entire section, but after sitting on it for a while, I think I missed a few key points of interest between these two. Both these characters are kidnappers. Specifically, kidnappers. The sheer amount of threat in these worlds might make that tiny little detail blend in with everything else. I know it did for me, but I believe it's telling that they're both kidnapper archetypes which kickstart the respective franchises. With this in mind, so much more about their narrative placement makes sense. Originally, I just thought it was kind of a fun little coincidence, you know? Both games start with a weird lanky guy chasing you around as an appetizer for the stranger antagonists for their respective games. But with the points of these two games in mind, their characters' roles make so much more sense. Of course the kidnapper archetype would be the first enemy you come across in these games. It's the immediate threat to children you think of, besides the homeboy Ryan. Their attitudes towards the act of kidnapping also reflects that earlier point I was making as well. That being, the sniffer does these things out of pure evil and filth, while the janitor holds a much more clinical, I guess, oblivious edge towards it. It's the perfect thematic juxtaposition and establishment of change between these two franchises. One does it as a job, showcasing the sheer wrongness of this world, while the other does it purely out of personal catharsis, just like an animal. Now let's get into something a little bit more abstract. This isn't their real skin. At least, I'm pretty sure it isn't. It's heavily implied that a good amount of the denizens of the Maw are wearing masks, and that, in reality, they tout this strange gray mass as heads. You know, I'm pretty sure this still hasn't been touched upon or explained, even despite all the, in my opinion, really bad retcons in the franchise post-Tarsier. There's this one mask in the doctor's office which looks disturbingly similar to Roger, and in concept art, you can see his face melting apart, akin to a rubber mask rather than an actual face. He also looks to have a similarly strange gray skull thing the twin chefs also seem to have, although his is off-puttingly smooth. It's pretty difficult to notice, but I don't think this is his actual face. The sniffer's easier to see it with though. He's literally a skin stealer. That's his character. Although it really isn't easy to tell in-game due to a lot of his character and sequences being cut. He was meant to have a malleable design over the course of the second chapter. You can actually still see traces of this idea in the final game right here when he epically trolls you. This is definitely going a bit into the conspiratorial side of my beliefs, but it's implied the sniffer isn't a man at all. He runs on all fours, hunts like an animal, and those are not human noises. Maybe he's related to the strange fox character which intermittently shows up within the forest. Or maybe he's something more mysterious like this strange blob thing, which for whatever reason has its own trading card, which I guess makes it significant. But he's definitely not natively human, or at least I don't think so. Now what exactly this means for these characters is definitely up to interpretation. But I believe it's primarily a metaphor for the masks of those who take advantage of those who are vulnerable wear. And whatever the hell else the sniffer's implied to be.
Where? What do you mean where?
Come on, Brad.
If we take into account the possibility of the sniffer being a literal animal, then that motif of a wolf in sheep's, or I guess human's clothing in this case, is showcased. An abstruse predator trying to hide behind the guise of something tangible to the mind of a child. The consequences of turning a blind eye, to let predators like the sniffer blend in right before us, even when they transform right before our very eyes. You know, for some reason, I have a really strange sense of sympathy for the janitor. Maybe it's the fact he's blind, or the way he just, like, semi-pathetically hobbles around the Maw, but I feel like he just isn't as malicious as the rest of the denizens. Maybe that mask I was talking about earlier wasn't to hide his identity from his victims, but rather to protect himself from the reality of it. Or it's working on me as well. However, over time, his mask begins to slip, leaving him utterly blind to his own actions. If the mask idea is true, then you have to wonder, why doesn't he just put it back up so he can see? Is he stupid? No, actually. This is just how he wants it. He gives up his vision for the relief of unaccountability, the ultimate protection from his own actions. Blind to everything, but so blatantly obvious to everyone else. The exact opposite of the sniffer.
Why does he just like slam the table on you and it just
funny,
shatters?
bro.
It just shatters, bro. Get under the fucking table. You get under the fucking table. Yo. This has me crying, bro.
It's so bad.
Yo.
It's really hard to compare these two, actually. On the surface, they're, practically identical. They're childhood environments with like little shits running amok and a big bad you have to face off against at the end. However, at the same time, they feel and play out so incredibly differently. It's almost enigmatic in a weird way. I've actually had a lot of trouble writing this section just due to this dissimilarity. It would be a blatant insult to Reanimal to write off these chapters as, clearly they ran out of ideas, this is the same exact thing. There's a reason why Tarsier went out of their way to re-explore such a familiar idea, rather than having the kids venture off to somewhere more unique, like, a cool mine shaft or something. This is because the ideas which are explored in environments like these are integral to these two games' storytelling. Those feelings of isolation, abandonment, hopelessness, and systematic injustice, all conjuncted with those feelings of togetherness, teamwork, bravery, and that ever-present Sisyphean hope. These are all concepts integral to either game, but to me at least, is best felt through Reanimal, and its re-exploration of a despondent childhood environment like the orphanage. Reanimal is obviously a lot grittier, a lot more disturbed than Little Nightmares. Therefore, there are less restrictions for what could be explored, and what could be experienced firsthand as a player. Revisiting concepts like these with their newfound creative freedom would practically be a no-brainer. That's why it exists despite the pre-existence of the schoolhouse. Now, that's not to say that the ideas elaborated on throughout Reanimal are exact one-to-one with what was explored in LN2. The mother is not a teacher, in the same way that the teacher is not a mother. So, even on a surface level, it's easy to understand how differing concepts of custodialism and caretaking are explored in either game. In a weird way, these two are actually indicative of the relationship between Little Nightmares and Reanimal as a whole. The easy, surface-level mock-ups of the franchises sound practically identical. Little kids traversing a big, dangerous world. However, it's the individual nuances which set these games apart. Their world building, their threats, their personality. That's what I intend to explore in this section. What overlaps and what differs between these two chapters. How Reanimal explores what Little Nightmares 2 could not.
Dude, you're not even doing it right. You're just mashing the buttons.
To me, the Orphanage of Reanimal feels like a pretty natural evolution of LN2 Schoolhouse. It's a thematic and environmental step toward the bleaker ends of Tarsier's storytelling. It's that sense of despair and misery which is always embedded into their work, just now amplified with a big scary M stamped on top of it. However, if we really want to get a good idea of what the Orphanage brings, then we're going to need to take a good look at what the Schoolhouse already accomplished. The Schoolhouse is chaos, pure and simple. The kind of chaos you just love to relish in. Sort of like casual CS lobbies.
Mateo, look behind you.
You can kind of just tell how much fun Tarsier had while designing this chapter. There's just so many things and plot beats being thrown your way, it's actually kind of difficult to pinpoint what exactly is being felt here. But when you look past the chaos, you find yourself face to face with a bad atmosphere of nostalgia. Little Nightmares, on a conceptual level, is about taking you back to your adolescence, to those times when everything seemed monumental and terrifying, and transforming those hyperboles to be all too real. The chapter embodies exactly that, the chaos of free time, the dead silence of taking a test you forgot to study for, and the consequences which come with that. All of these things which seemed massive when we were younger, now personified. During the chaos, the environment exists solely as a supplementary device, only amplifying the danger through its winding hallways and mind-boggling layout. Although sometimes the environment gets bored of hanging back. However, there's these momentary moments of silence, moments like the chess puzzle midway through the chapter. It's quiet, overly quiet. Remember, this is the first time you're really separated from 6, so you really feel it beating down on you. Here you get to really take in the environment and your surroundings, and you begin to realize it's completely hollow. None of this place makes sense. I mean, that's a pretty surface level observation to make when looking at these franchises, but bear with me here. These guys certainly aren't going to be functioning members of society when they grow up, nor do I think they even can grow up. So what's the point of this school? Well, the point is to punish you, nothing else. Just like the janitor's levels, this space exists solely for the convenience of the teacher. The environment exists purely to torment you over your school years and to expose the negative feelings which come with that. Again, those motifs of loneliness, inadequacy, and abuse of power repeatedly appear within this chapter, and doing their best to overwhelm Mono throughout. The schoolhouse, a deliberate attack on your fondest memories. Now in 4K. Now that we have a good idea of what the schoolhouse accomplished, we can talk about Reanimal. Hold on, let me just... There we go. I love having a 90/70. Not only is the orphanage a thematic step towards a darker storyline, but in my opinion, is also a stronger interpretation of what was established by the schoolhouse. To state the obvious, an orphanage is a lot more depressing of a location than a school. Debatably. This ends up bringing a lot of implications to the forefront of both gameplay and story for this chapter. On the gameplay side of things, there's not constant plot beats like the schoolhouse. The lonelier air of the location, paired with the avoidant nature of the primary antagonist, which, by the way, will be looked at later, makes for a marginally slower pace compared to the schoolhouse. For the most part, you're just making your way through the army of spider children before anything really consequential occurs. This slower pace enables the chapter to channel those themes I was talking about earlier to a stronger extent. From my own experience, there is more opportunity to feel them rather than to be shown them. Where the schoolhouse achieved these themes of loneliness and injustice through sheer chaos and its familiar structures, story-wise, I think the orphanage is a lot more, sophisticated about it. It doesn't need constant chaos to make you feel out of your depth, although it is nice to have. Instead, it relies almost entirely on its environment and atmosphere. No matter where you are in this chapter, there's this gloomy, disturbed presence right alongside you, as if you're joined by some invisible, heartbroken spirit. That voice screaming at you to leave, the dread which is bestirred by the utter extinction flowing through these halls. While some amount of this does originate from the fact that, yeah, this is an orphanage, and it's gonna be sad and creepy, a good majority of the heavy lifting is courtesy of its visual approach. In Little Nightmares 2, you're in a decidedly active environment, you know? The school isn't abandoned, it's actively in session, which makes it reasonably navigatable and easy to see. The main source of dread is coming from the enemies, you know, not really the environment. As a side note, I still really do love its environments, especially when it becomes extra surreal like the library sequence. But in my opinion, there simply just isn't enough of those kinds of settings to really make me feel, out of my depth here. For this exact reason, I actually really enjoy the Overman's reinterpretation of the school. It pushes that sense of surrealism danger to the limit, making me feel legitimately pretty uneasy looking at it. Anyways, back to what I was saying. The orphanage differs radically in this regard. There's almost no working lights here, and everywhere is difficult to navigate. It's dusty, unkempt, and God, it's just so blue.
Why are you blue?
This environment is honestly pretty incredible. It's an architectural hazard. The entire building just suddenly collapsing feels like something to actually worry about, all thanks to its decidedly decrepit art direction. Once again, that idea of invasion is present here, carrying over from the small forest town. This space is fairly normal proportion-wise, but it's given this incredibly uncanny and unwelcoming aura through years of visible neglect and abuse. Hallways destroyed in the wake of the mother. Petrified children courtesy of maternal neglect and a merciless son. A building repurposed for something it was never intended for. The bastardization of the ethos behind a foster home. In this way, these two environments are actually opposite to one another. For LN2, the environment exists to be that environment. built from the ground up to be a school for the sake of being a school, even despite its fundamental misunderstanding of what one actually is, being exaggerated and neglected in all the wrong areas. Sort of like describing a dog to someone who has never seen a dog before and then asking them to draw it, resulting in an environment which feels more like a prison than a school. In Reanimal, however, its environment used to be a at least somewhat functioning location, evident from Hood's dialogue,
Always hated that place.
but has now been repurposed for something far darker. A transitional environment which is meant to support those who wouldn't stand a chance in life otherwise, having now been twisted into a space where zero hope exists. A transformed ritual grounds, devoted to worshipping a creature which seemingly does nothing but consume. Those who serve, doomed to an existence of dependency. Remember, they petrify in daylight, so they can't just escape, or do anything else for that matter besides bicker with one another. Doomed to a preset hierarchy, glorified worker bees who will do anything to protect their queen, going as far as to throw away their lives to protect her. This is why the mother should have been a massive queen bee.
Mrs. B.
Of course, when discussing the orphanage of Reanimal, there sits a pretty big elephant in the room. The sunken city. What the hell does it have to do with all of this? Well, if I'm being honest, I don't have like a magical one-size-fits-all answer, but I can definitely throw out a couple of pot shots as to why it's placed here. The first is that, it's a cool looking environment which coherently explains away the slower pacing of the prior chapter while acting as an excuse for that really great transition at the beginning of the final prolonged chase sequence of the chapter. Plus, it creates a lot of questions. Why is there an entire destroyed city hiding underneath an orphanage? Why does the mother reside here instead of hunting by herself? Why is it following FNAF location logic? Usually, it's good to have questions like these, especially for a game like this, but this feels abnormally without context. Kind of like the hanging man at the start of LN1. Looking online, I noticed a good amount of people also having trouble explaining away the exact narrative significance this place holds. So maybe it doesn't have a real through line here. Maybe instead, its relationship is entirely emblematic. Think about it. When going off this angle, this place could be interpreted as a sort of dark reality which quite literally hides beneath the guise of good intent / childhood innocence. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that sound a whole lot like the implied plot of Reanimal? A world seemingly cursed by a ritual which involved these children, likely with the good, if not a bit naive, intent of stopping an endless war? The city itself looks to be ancient, perhaps harkening back to the beginning of this supposed curse, or maybe even the war itself. Who knows? Maybe this is the city where Reanimal's version of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand took place. With this perspective, the city sort of acts like a cue, that Reanimal isn't just Little Nightmares with a different coat of paint. While yes, it explores similar themes and sure does look a lot like Little Nightmares, it's handling its own story, its own themes. An entirely new world hiding behind the guise of familiarity. But then again, maybe it is just a cool looking set piece, which, I'm cool with. And who knows, maybe we'll get a better answer in the DLCs. Look, I'm not gonna beat around the bush here, and these two don't have very much in common. Not in terms of visuals, roles, or even very much in way of behavior. It was easy to draw connections between the Sniffer and the Janitor because, the Sniffer just kinda looks like Roger if he got a couple of limb surgeries and hopped on Ozempic, but for these two, I can't really link much. The only thing really warranting a comparison between these two is the role they play in their respective chapters, but even that's got some pretty fundamental differences. It's like what I said earlier. On the surface, they're identical, but beyond that mock-up, similarities are admittedly sparse. I think that really, they have more differences than similarities, which to an outsider makes sense. Fucking look at them. But that may be surprising to hear for those who played Reanimal after LN2 and got that faint sense of deja vu in the orphanage. Despite this, I think it'd be cool to look at them and try to draw connections where I can. But first, let's go back to that surface level reading of these two. Despite their roles of the caretaker archetype being the big connection here, they accomplish it through completely different means. There are different types of caretakers. The mother is maternity, but the teacher is authority, through and through. It's clear to see this. The teacher's presence is overwhelming. We catch a glimpse of her before we see any of her pupils. The space revolves around her. She's the focal point. I saved this aspect of the schoolhouse for this section because I think it says a lot more about the teacher than the environment. But there's surveillance everywhere. Her protruding neck allows her to exploit even the most mundane of activities. From making sure kids aren't cheating, to more violatory acts such as spying through paintings for seemingly no real reason besides earning her more control. Any semblance of privacy is laughed at here. This, paired with the teacher's more hands-on approach to disruptive behavior, definitely garners her the label of authority through absolute control. As a matter of fact, that's probably why the lunch lady was scrapped and thrown into the freezer. That decision was made to accentuate the sheer grasp the teacher has over the entire school. And having a supplementary big monster here would stray away from that focus and characterization. On the other hand, the mother is a mother.
I promise this is a cool point I'm making.
I'll admit, it's pretty difficult to get a good reading of her, both because of her animal thing she's got going on and her admittedly low screen time. But I think I've gotten a good grasp over it. I had a Jimmy Neutron brain blast, and by that I mean I watched the Overman's video on her, where the teacher has complete and utter control over her pupils through an overwhelming presence and physical repercussion. The mother has one over on her. She's their mom. The teacher's students attack you and adhere to her wishes out of fear, acting from learned behavior and what is safe to say are years worth of consequences. A quick and easy death to Mono is likely preferable to the repercussions of refusing her commands. The mother, however, doesn't need any of that. She gives birth to her army. It's as simple as that. The teacher needs to reinforce her authority through action. She needs to maintain that air of fear because otherwise she has nothing over them. The mother gives birth and then appears to immediately abandon her children. And even despite that, they're eternally devoted to her. The sheer fact that she's their mother undoes any wrongdoing and neglect in their minds because she's all they have and know. They practically form a religion which worships abandonment. So much sacrifice made, all to appease a creature which stranded them at birth. Ultra kill. I think this demonstrates a good amount of what Reanimal is trying to explore through this chapter. The Little Nightmares Schoolhouse showcased the result of a systematic, overwhelming rule under one individual. The apotheosis of an Ouroboros of abuse which hid behind the unassuming guise of a school. Yeah, look at me, I can use big words. However, the orphanage is trying to explore something different. It's got all the characteristics of this exact formula, but the means at which it's achieved are completely different. These children aren't trying to kill you out of fear or punishment and exhilaration. They're killing you because they think it's the right thing to do. You pose a direct threat to their mother, their deity. Even despite her ignorance towards them, practically using them as tools, they love her. They need to protect her. A preset goal for serving their mother, with a biological defect which prevents them from doing anything else. Little Nightmares explores the world of abuse, but Reanimal explores the world of neglect. Almost identical statements, but statements which carry their own completely separate connotations nonetheless. Insert cool sentence about how that's a metaphor for Little Nightmares and Reanimal. Now we can talk about their differences. How about their behavior, huh? Similar to the sniffer and the janitor, one of these two are clearly farther gone than the other. However, unlike that previous comparison, it isn't courtesy of Reanimal. It's the sniffer. Oh fuck, I mean the teacher. I mean that's pretty obvious, what with the, everything about her. Although, wouldn't the mother be right up there too? She devours innocent creatures, abandons her creations without a second thought, and then unrelentlessly pursues the siblings in bucket throughout the chapter. However, just bullet pointing her actions like that does her a big disservice, I think. The big sticking point here is the simple fact that she's an animal. We don't get to question animals. While it is questionable as to just how much conscious thought she really has, evident from what I think is her trying to aura farm here, it's safe to say that she's primarily operating off of animalistic instinct. She hates us in the same way a threatened animal hates you. You're in her territory and are currently posing a threat to her. So, as a result, she stops at nothing to destroy us before we destroy her. This, unexpectedly, is not actually reflected by the teacher. Have you ever noticed how in Little Nightmares 2, she never really pursues us throughout the building despite our racket? She's not actively searching for us, we just keep coincidentally ending up in the same room as her. Now, while I don't doubt that her intentions towards us are a lot more outwardly malicious than the mother, she clearly doesn't perceive us as a threat like she does, more of just an annoyance. From the moment the mother sees us for the first time, she never stops the pursuit, throwing herself against rotten planks and trepid winds to decimate us. As a matter of fact, it doesn't take long for her at all to put us against a wall. This is her territory after all. While a good amount of this ravenousness undoubtedly is because she's starving, remember, she somehow fumbled that fat-ass pig earlier despite it literally being within her grasp. It's clear that she's doing this out of fear. I mean, just look at her animations near the end of the chapter. She doesn't know what the fuck she's doing. She's swinging her arms around at a complete desperation. She's clearly terrified. Compare this to the final scene we have with the teacher, and we've got ourselves a clear difference in characterization. The fact that we managed to kill the mother and not the teacher, I think says a lot. The mother is a tragic character in my eyes. While one may experience a sense of catharsis when finally finishing off the mother, I think the intended feeling here is guilt. The mother, while a destructive force of nature, is at the end of the day an animal. A scared, threatened animal at that. I mean, really, it's not surprising at all that the mother took on such hostility towards us. Any territorial animal would. Near the end, there's a sense of what appears to be acceptance from the mother's end. She's at the end of the line and can do nothing besides sit and wait for us to finish her off. Maybe that hint of consciousness is showing through here, and with it, a sense of remorse from the mother's end. It was either a scared animal or us, and we chose us. An animal which acted in its own nature, now killed for it. And yet, the teacher's cycle of abuse, it gets to live on. But you know what?
Fuck them kids,
While we're on the topic of children, I guess I might want to talk about the little shits of these two worlds a little bit. I'll be honest, the bullies were always the lowlight at the schoolhouse for me. I like their little traps and their attitude, but I never really found myself looking forward to them on replay, let alone having the urge to really look into them. I'll be honest, the whole dark magic construct side of the Little Nightmares universe was always the least interesting element for me personally. I get how other people enjoy it, but to me, it just feels a lot less intriguing than the more physical, deranged side of this universe. The lady's dark magic was never all that to me as a kid, and it still isn't to me now. And I think the signal and everything surrounding that is a big step up in terms of intrigue, even if they're technically like the same thing or something along those lines. I like their personality, and I mean, I guess I like the satisfaction of caving their head in, but even that's spoiled sometimes. Again, I'm gonna bring up the Overman's teacher redesign from earlier, because I also think that having legitimate children here, along with having the focus shift entirely onto the teacher, would have made this chapter feel a lot more threatening, while also simultaneously squandering the annoyance often experienced when engaging with them. Now that I say it, seeing the teacher outright killing a student in front of you after messing up or cheating would have been an incredible tone setter. But to be fair, that'd likely be stretching that T rating a bit too thin. I think the Stone Children were Tarsier's remedy on that design. They're construct things, yes, but I think they're a lot more interesting than the bullies, even if they don't have as colorful of personalities. While the bullies definitely have the more unique design of the two, I think the Stone Children are a lot more effective in their placement and have a lot more depth, while simultaneously bringing along with them substantially stronger questions. Why does the mother give birth to them? Why do they die in sunlight? What exactly are they?
Why are you gay?
Why are you alive? I hope I'm not subconsciously cherry picking here, but do you see what I mean?
You are gay.
I also just kind of like their personalities and designs a lot more than the bullies somehow. Maybe it's the simplicity of it, but it's a lot more interesting to watch these guys functioning than the bullies for whatever reason. I think they're more off-putting designs being conjuncted with seeing this asshole throwing bottles at Bucket while he's being carried away makes for a really funny juxtaposition and tone in my eyes, making them feel a lot more lived in than the bullies. That or its recency bias. One thing that isn't recency bias, however, is their visual storytelling. They blend in with one another. Their individuality is a non-factor here because they're defined by the mother instead. The bullies are just like pottery, which is kinda cool, but they don't do much for me besides that. I also don't really understand the narrative significance of that beyond just kids are expendable in this world, or there are no kids left here. Although, I do get how it's an excuse to have a kick-ass explodey effect for killing them within the limits of a T rating. I also just kind of find them funnier than the bullies somehow. Like, I know the bullies have a lot more purposely funnier moments, but look. The bullies are mean because they're like 8 years old and live in this sort of ravenous environment. The Spider Kids are kind of just dicks to one another because it's funny and they have nothing else better to do. They also addressed a lot of the combat frustrations many had with the bullies by having your attacks be more button mashy rather than a deliberate wind-up. But that's more of a change made between games than these two in particular. Either way, the combat in the orphanage just feels so much better to play with, man. I also really like both of their animations. The bullies get across that vibe of being erratic little crackheads perfectly, while the Spider Kids animations all feel very rehearsed yet vicious and improvised. Kind of like an ambush predator in the wild. Even when the monsters aren't deliberately animals, animal-like traits still manage to sneak their way into their DNA either way, which is really cool. One last thing, their scream when you bash them into the offering hole, it's fucking horrifying, it's great. Overall, I can confidently say that they're a big step up from the bullies of Little Nightmares 2, even if they don't have this. Let's talk about the similarities between the designs of the teacher and the mother now.
There's nothing.
Thank you, son.
Just kidding, I do have this little crackpot point between these two that I can throw out here. The whole animal thing going on. Normally, design-wise, what the hell is there for me to point out here and call a similarity? I guess the old person-ish looking arms of the mother could be a discussion here, but that's a massive stretch. Although, judging from some deleted content, that could be a plausible avenue. But I really don't want to take every bit of cut content for gospel. It's kind of like the cut Frozen Undyne text ring in Deltarune. I don't want to take that as gospel either, even despite its plausibility, because it just hasn't officially been put out there just yet. But let's go back to that stretch of a connection I stated earlier. The mother's part in this whole animal thing is obvious, but the teacher's definitely where we get into more speculatory territory. Have you ever noticed just how animal-like she is? I'm not just talking about her insatiable feeling for me, most of the Little Nightmares residents have that, but her design. I don't know if it's just me or not, but she kind of reminds me a bit of a bird, what with her lips cracking downward a bit like a beak, as well as her main mode of attack being this strange, jutting ambush mechanism, not unlike some of the more obtuse aspects of select avian species, striking from above where she's most lethal. She's also weirdly territorial and moves not unlike an animal, specifically an owl. To be honest, she's kind of evocative of the sniffer in this way, as if she's some kind of animal piloting some stiff, ill-fitting skin suit, doing its best to imitate what it thinks the teacher acts like. This has always irked me, because I don't think anybody's ever really brought this up, but it was weirdly enough always the first thing my mind went to when I first played this game in 2021. If you squint a bit, you can kind of see these two as these strange bird-adjacent creatures. This is just some weird, coincidental link I found between these two, so it's probably best not to look too far into it. But I just kind of thought it was neat having my weird first impression of the teacher be somewhat vindicated 5 years later. Also, I didn't know where else to mention this, but both of their vocal directions are these terrible, screeching, sort of vocoded sounding moans. They're both very post-processed sounding creatures, which, I mean, I just thought was kind of neat. While I'm here, I'd also like to bring up that motif of hunger which is carried between these two. The idea of hunger is, in fact, one of those things I think was purposely brought over when the shift between franchises was made. So I'll go more in depth on that later. Just know that these two are pretty juicy examples of that motif for right now. Now we can talk about their designs properly. The teacher's design is legitimately incredible, and I think everyone knows that. It's clear that they put a good amount of the development focus just on her, and it pretty clearly paid off. I mean, the choices made for her just fit so well into this world and fills that archetypal role of the cruel school teacher to a T. The significance of her extending neck symbolizing her grasp over the entire school and that all-seeing eye motif constantly seen throughout this franchise is just so well thought out. Her mundanity otherwise, symbolically representing how these cycles of abuse can so easily go unnoticed, while also just being a really good spin on a stereotypical pissed-off English teacher design is just perfect. Like, if you knew nothing about her, nor her actions, you might feel bad about being put off by her appearance, even though it's totally justified. Even if her design isn't as immediately disturbing as some other Residents' designs, I think her neck mechanism easily makes up for that shock, especially on a first-time playthrough. It just creates so much tension and panic, and I'll be honest, I definitely a few times when she was chasing me on replay. I probably shouldn't say that here. I also just want to point out the care that was taken into making her into this ravenous, spontaneous monster. While a lot of other Tarsiers residents also have this characteristic, it's particularly played out here, really playing into that idea of the two-faced teacher. Her design is kind of the definition of quality over quantity, as are, I think, a majority of Tarsier's other residents' designs. You guys are just alright. The mother's design is also incredible, but I don't know, something about it just feels incomplete. I genuinely don't understand why I feel this way. I really do like her design, her featureless face and spider motifs especially, but I just feel like it's missing something. Like, I know I'm looking at her full design, I can tell this is her full design, but I just have this weird feeling in the back of my skull which feels like I'm missing something. Maybe it's the largely dull color palette, which I do like, or maybe it's the sheer amount of character real estate which is reserved by her mod, but it's something. This isn't me hating, by the way. I legitimately really do love her design. I think I might just be stupid. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you feel the same way. Her massive opening both clearly conveying her insatiable hunger and just being a really cool design quirk is awesome. This, along with her human limbs, easily brings about a lot of questions regarding her origins and, by extension, the very nature of the Reanimal curse as a whole, which is what a good character design is supposed to do, no? Another aspect I really enjoy about her design is the entire colossal mythological aspect of her character. She's this hulking, insatiable behemoth with her own devoted followers, which is actually a bit similar in description to some of H.P. Lovecraft's work. Her design actually looks a bit like some beheaded demon beast, also feeding into that mythological feel. One more thing I want to bring about the mother is the allegory she brings with her. Tarsier stuff is always ripe with allegory, particularly pertaining to threats against children and consumerism, but the mother is unique in a way that her story isn't directly affiliated with those two camps. Her entire archetype is a mother, a woman with children, or at least that's the nice way of putting it. The horribly blunt way to say it is a creature made for birth, something crafted to give life, and nothing more. The area where any identifiable features which could have pushed a creature beyond that cruel label would go, instead occupied by a whole to give birth. The mother is the embodiment of this dark perspective towards women as a whole, the heartless view of a mother. If you look closely, you'll notice how she gives birth to the stone children seemingly against her will. She's a mother not by choice, but by brutal unwillingness as a result of a sabotaged biology, upon which she is given no choice but to hide away, retreating deep into the catacombs of memory and darkness. There is no happiness to be found with these children, at least not anymore. The twisted irony of her only being known as the mother showing through here. There is no joy to be found in this motherhood, only pain. and an insatiable feeling for meat. Fuck, it's just so good, man. I hope I didn't come off as a recital of the Overmans video 1-to-1, but this allegory is just so incredible I had to mention it here. It just gives you such a vastly different perspective on what is on the surface just another scary Tarsier monster. It transforms these two chapters from just being abstract horror into tragedy. At first you might despise these enemies, but upon looking closer, you begin to feel remorse for everyone involved. And you begin to truly feel the weight of your actions. A mother killed. The children you left behind, ironically orphaned, fulfilling the twisted prophecy of this building's namesake. The schoolhouse doesn't really do anything like this. The story there is very cut and dry, save for the questions inherent to the Little Nightmares universe as a whole, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's still an effective story being told at the end of the day. I just think the orphanage is a lot more impacting. In my opinion, the mother's a lot more intriguing than the teacher, seeing as she's just sort of a simple idea done really well. But I also think that could be said for each of their chapters as a whole. The schoolhouse is just a really good time, delivering a lot of great sequences and a solid story from one simple idea. But the orphanage as a whole is a lot more abstract. Its titular monster is this obtuse, confusing design which leaves you wanting more. I know I was when I first saw her design in the trailer. Along with this, the supplementary enemies have their own questions to be asked, and there's plenty of environmental and plot choices which don't really make sense on a first-time viewing. Sand City. Yet, as you go unnecessarily deep into it, it starts to unravel. And I think right there is where it surpasses the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse is definitely a lot easier to pick up, and I generally had a better time playing through it. But that level of intrigue, I think, just can't really compete with the orphanage. But at the end of the day, I think it all just comes down to preference. If you like more active storytelling and stronger gameplay beats, you'll prefer the schoolhouse. But if you value a stronger story and can put up with a good amount of open-endedness, I think you'll come to prefer the orphanage, as I do. However, I do feel like it needs a sizable boost in content and a bit more elaboration to really feel complete. At least enough to make it feel on par with the Sniffer's build-up and sequences. The last thing I want to bring up between these two is the musical scores which accompany them in their chapters. But that's a topic I think is better fit for the next section of this video. I realize I'm saving a lot of discussion for this next section, but...
Bro, that's skill, bro. I can even stay inside the lines with coloring. Bad at coloring inside the lines when it came to school shit. Yo, this dude below me has a similar experience.
Hey, look, we're already here. That wasn't so bad, see? For this last section, I'd like to go over the broader implications of these two games in particular. While Reanimal certainly shares a good amount of similarities with Little Nightmares 1, particularly the overlapping maritime aesthetic and various elements of the Sniffer, I kept on finding myself coming right on back to Little Nightmares 2 when analyzing Reanimal. I mean, it's pretty easy to see why. Both games have you guiding a titular boy and girl duo across a forlorn world where everything seems to want them dead. But I think there's more meaningful points to be made beyond just those broad strokes. This section may feel a bit disjointed compared to the previous, but there's just an abundance of miscellaneous, semi-insignificant elements which overlap/shift between these two games that I really want to talk about. At the same time though, there's bigger ideas which are carried across these two games. Ideas which, in fact, I think span across all of Tarsier's projects, originating even all the way back to the city of Metronome. I'm sure I'm gonna miss a lot here just due to the sheer scale of this discussion, so if anything stands out to you between these two, or even just across Tarsier projects in general, then feel free to bring them up in the comments. I'd love to read through them. First, let me touch on a lot of the more insignificant points, which I just kind of think are cool to talk about. The color palette of both of these games, it's just so fucking blue, man. I can't get over it. Funnily enough, this was actually one of my main criticisms of Little Nightmares 2 as a game when I first played it. It's just so blue. Since then, I've definitely come to appreciate it, as it makes for an instantly recognizable color palette and greatly benefits the game's atmosphere, but I'm also petty. One of the main things I actually really enjoyed about Little Nightmares 1 was its evolving environmental design, which was directly complemented by its shifting color palette. You begin in the dreary, wet, cold underworks of the maw, working yourself up through the maddening yellow strife of the kitchens, where you eventually find your way into the warm, cozy coffin of the upper levels. Just showing quick little snippets of the scenery evolving really doesn't do it any justice. You'd really have to view it in-game over the course of 4 or so hours to truly appreciate this very beautiful gimmick. It really is quite a shame that this wasn't carried over to Little Nightmares 2 nor Reanimal, say for near their ends, which I think leads to a diminished feel of progression compared to Little Nightmares 1. To be fair to these games though, that'd be extremely difficult to pull off compared to Little Nightmares 1. That game got away with color incoherency because there was no coherency in the maw. Meanwhile, that kind of environmental color shift just wouldn't really make sense in these places beyond just different colored buildings, I guess. At the end of the day though, it's really not that serious. Both of these games are absolutely gorgeous either way. It's just really funny that they're both really fucking blue. The shift in gameplay between these games, I think, is surprisingly emblematic. Little Nightmares' movement is very sluggish. You're a small child in this ginormous, warped world. You really don't cover all that much ground when running, and just about every jump, swing, or grab looks incredibly draining. I mean, the movement itself is very sort of dense, if I had to give it a label. It all definitely feeds into that nightmarish quality, lining up with real-life dreams where running never seems to get us anywhere. In Reanimal, however, it's a night and day difference. You're fast as hell in this game. You cover so much more ground than in Little Nightmares because your characters have grown 3 or 4 years worth of limb length since then. It just feels so nice and tactile to play with. And I think it makes chases and encounters a whole lot smoother to play around, especially with the removal of the stamina mechanic, say for some awkward huffing and puffing. However, as part of this double-edged sword, Reanimal has far more limiting exploration and next to no on-ground movement abilities. You're not able to parkour about as effectively as you are in Little Nightmares because there simply isn't as much of a focus on creative maneuverability due to the leveling out of this world's environment. These areas have become far more feasible to traverse normally, leading to much less of a focus on a dreamlike atmosphere within this game. Instead, it's all meant to feel very real, very intense. Chases in this game are desperate. Every movement of your character could spell the end of you if you aren't careful due to the sheer control and direction you hold. The animations complement this primal feel as well. The boy and girl are desperate in every action they take. They do their best to separate themselves from danger as awkwardly as they can, fumbling about even as their legs fail them. It's all incredibly choreographed, honestly. Reanimal's movement is meant to be reminiscent of how real people would legitimately act in a situation like this, while Little Nightmares is a lot more exaggerated due to the nature of that world. Six and Mono are strange kids in a strange world. They rely on their warped environment and their world's confusing rules to get by. The boy and the girl, on the other hand, they've got nothing going for them. All they have are longer limbs and I guess this boat, but even that won't save them.
It don't go down.
It goes down.
No, it don't. Oh!
They need to rely on quick thinking and efficiency, fighting tooth and nail to survive this invasion they found themselves in the midst of, just like wild animals. With the jump between franchises being made, Tarsier was released of a lot of the limitations inherent to the Little Nightmares franchise. I already went over the effect the lifting of content guidelines had in the Sniffer section, but there's plenty of other limiting elements of the Little Nightmares franchise which were taken care of. One of the most significant, I think, being the game's camera system. Little Nightmares was built from the ground up to portray itself as some disturbed dollhouse. The game, being this blend of 2D and 3D environments, just created such an incredibly unique atmosphere, while being distinct enough from similarly styled games like Insight to stand on its own 2 legs. It was the perfect way for this kind of story to be told. As a side note, I also just think it's cute that within some select rooms, you can see exactly where the room ends, being cut off by this infinite, unwavering black void. It's really quite uncomfortable to view, and definitely adds to that dissonant, fake atmosphere these games can give off. With the shift to Reanimal, the side-on camera gimmick was mostly done away with. being replaced with a conventional, better controllable camera which directly follows the orphans. This was obviously made to better separate the game from Little Nightmares, but as an added benefit, it tremendously improves this game's cinematography and, by extension, the effectiveness of its story. While the Little Nightmares camera is undoubtedly iconic, it definitely had its ups and downs. It fostered a lot of genuine ingenuity in terms of composition / gameplay and created for an instantly recognizable screenshot, but there were certainly moments where it could feel limiting. I think this is best felt throughout Little Nightmares 2, as due to the openness of this world in particular, the whole side-on camera style led to some missed opportunity compositionally. Also, as a side effect, the left-to-right movement of Mono feels largely aimless up until the final encounter with the Thin Man. While this moment without a doubt kicks ass, you can't deny it feels a lot less fluid than Little Nightmares 1's progression. I also think it leads to some redundancy and probable burnout for Tarsier when developing these environments. There's only so many different ways to do a 2D left-to-right space without it feeling a bit too samey. Little Nightmares 3 proved this point, so removing this gimmick heading into their new franchise just makes sense. With Reanimal's more traditional camera, you're right there in that world. There's no dissonant barrier between you and the events unfolding on your screen, making the entire thing feel violent and all too real. They also decided to go above and beyond with this camera, just for fun. It's Tarsier, what did you expect? It just feels so fluid and clean, while featuring these harsh jump cuts which click perfectly with the harsh, ruthless air Reanimal possesses. Like, you can just tell how much fun they had with it at certain points. Just look at the mother's spiral chase sequence. It's absolutely beautiful. Coincidentally, this impartial nature of the Reanimal camera creates for an interesting point when placed side by side with Little Nightmares. Little Nightmares is confining and constant because you're in a world you aren't meant to be in. You have nowhere to go because everything wants you dead. A constant, following reminder of your nonconformity to this world. In comparison, Reanimal's world is far more open and grounded. This world used to be at least somewhat normal, somewhat beautiful, but has since been twisted into this. This camera is disjointed and jumpy because that's the nature of this world. It's conventional compared to Little Nightmares, yes, but it retains this incredibly harsh edge while remaining off-puttingly beautiful. The perfect blend of cinema and psychosis. Just try imagining Reanimal with Little Nightmares' camera style. I think it's safe to say that the experience would significantly worsen, and that's a really good sign of genuine innovation. While this point is inherently smaller than the camera one, I still want to speak on the art style differences between these two games, and try to identify just exactly how they differ. Tarsier's art style, while certainly shifting across each of their projects, retains this certain air. Little Nightmares and City of Metronome have these very exaggerated, almost cartoony yet grimy art styles. They're off-putting, yes, but they have this undeniable charm and whimsy to them. These guys are just fucking nasty. Whatever cuteness or silver lining to the madness of these worlds might have existed before has been utterly eradicated. Characters and environments in this game are especially crafted to instill fear and evoke far heavier themes than that of Little Nightmares. While I do think that this makes this game inherently less charming than Little Nightmares, I'm not so sure I would have enjoyed growing up with this game as much as I did with Little Nightmares. I do believe it's the best step forward for the studio's work. Tarsier has a loyal group of followers thanks to Little Nightmares, and now has the freedom to delve deeper into more and more egregious ideas. They don't need that hook of cute horror anymore, instead choosing to experiment with a heightened focus on despair and storytelling. And this game's art style reflects exactly that. In-game, you can mostly just see this through the character designs and general direction of the game, but I think this point is best illustrated through the respective games' concept art. The early sketches of these games are fairly similar, both being these hand-drawn, sketched pieces, but if you look closely, you can immediately notice a shift in tone. LN2 is very general, conveying a good idea of what the final projects could possibly look like. You know, what concept art is meant to do. Meanwhile, for Reanimal, it's absolutely nasty, man. It's amazing. The world is mangled, The monsters are horrifically detailed, and the drawings themselves also have a generally darker color to them. There's zero reprieve from the reality of these monsters and environments here. The dark tone of this game was literally baked into the concept of it. I mean, like, they look like fucking police sketches, which I actually think there's a good chance that that was what they were going for here. If it was, then that might have also been meant to feed into the overly real feel of this game's world compared to Little Nightmares. Also, God, this concept art just kicks ass in general. There's a huge difference when it comes to the soundtracks of both of these games. Tobias Lilja was just such an integral part of this game franchise, man. His scores between these two games just have such an unmistakable air to them. It's practically the other half of this franchise as a whole. I mean, we all know why. His tracks practically define this world as much as the art does. Every sound in this game is baked with an oven of melancholy and tenderness. Every track conveys what it intends to with flying colors, from the purity of friendship to the dread of the boogeyman. I'm not a sound guy, so I can't really go very well into this topic, but suffice to say, Tobias has made a genuine legacy for himself through the soundtrack. Plenty of Little Nightmares soundtracks get used in a multitude of YouTube videos nowadays, and that's always a sign that you've created something worth remembering. When the jump was made to Reanimal, Tobias Lilja did not return to compose for the game. Instead, the soundtrack was made between 3 people: Christian Vasselbring, Jacob Carlson, and Stefan... I can't pronounce that last name, I'm sorry. With Vasselbring having previously worked for the sound design of Little Nightmares. Saying it up front, Reanimal's soundtrack is not as good as Little Nightmares, but I think that's alright. Reanimal does not have a traditional soundtrack. It does not contain very much material, if that makes sense. Its soundtrack is more akin to noise and ambience rather than a proper musical score. The sounds of this game are legitimately disturbing. They're made through incredibly impressive means, with a particular emphasis being placed on capturing uniquely off-putting noises. While this does make for an incredibly powerful listening experience, I feel like it just doesn't have the same impact as Tobias' score. Each segment in Reanimal does have its own motif and musical identity, just not to the same extent of Little Nightmares. The sniffer in the small forest town is very string music focused, being paired with these deep, bellowing booms and bone crackling to signify the immediate sense of being watched you get here. The string music likely originally stemming off of the sniffer's cut violin sequence. The orphanage is filled with primitive ticking and spastic noises, signifying the antiquity of the location while also playing off the animalistic, ravenous nature of the antagonists. It actually reminds me a bit of a horror movie soundtrack, what with its primary focus being atmosphere and overly syncing up with specific scenes. They also end up mixing together a little bit, I noticed. There's a heavy emphasis placed on these booming, grinding noises throughout the entire score, which while reinforcing a brutal musical identity, doesn't offer very much variation, I feel. This actually confuses me quite a bit, because the original trailer for this game featured this incredibly off-putting, synthy hook for its soundtrack, which would have fit perfectly alongside a multitude of sequences within the game. Mostly the sniffer. Fuck, he's the favorite child, isn't he? I guess we can add this as well to the list of things from the trailer that weren't in the final game. It simply isn't as strong as the Little Nightmares overall score. Those songs, whether it be the beauty of childhood being captured through prison toys, or the unwavering cruelty of this world as captured by March of the Guests, are incredible even outside of the game. They capture such incredibly unique sound profiles that they manage to encapsulate the meaning of their respective moments even outside of the games. By the way, I haven't seen anyone else mention this, but Little Nightmares 2's soundtrack can get so experimental at times. Like, everyone knows how good the Hunter's theme is, but you don't hear people appreciating the sheer intensity of shopping spasm, you know? Yet, despite my gripes with Reanimal's overall soundtrack, there stands one track out of the entire list which debunks any claims of laziness this game's soundtrack, or by extension, the game itself may receive. The Soldier's Piano Improvisation. It's the only song in the game that, I think, manages to capture the essence of this game and the beauty which comes with it. This track right here is Reanimal's Prison Toys. It being the only proper music track in the entire game allows it to stick out like a sore thumb next to everything else here. It's a mere piano impro by Jacob Carlson, yet it stands as a poignant testament for everything this game stands for. The cruelty of war, the beauty of animals and children, the never-ending battle between doom and hope, the discovery of meaning in a posthumous world. It's incredible. And if it takes an entire soundtrack of atmospheric noise for it to have this profound of an effect, then so be it. The sound design for Reanimal is unsurprisingly amazing. A good amount of the sound designers for Reanimal had previously worked on the Little Nightmares series, so it's really not a surprise that they managed to recapture that incredible sense of scale and discomfort through noise alone. However, I believe Reanimal has more of an overwhelming tone to its noise compared to Little Nightmares, especially near the end of this game. I think the calmer, quieter ambiences of both of these games have a very familiar tone even across their differing environments, perfectly encapsulating the feel of each of their locations. From the whomping of supermassive fans in the maw, to the white noise of rain in the pale city, and then the ghostly, dry ecosystem of the orphanage. They pull off this resonating tone wonderfully in quiet moments like this, as they always have. However, when it comes to proper encounters, that's where I think a noticeable shift in tone sits. There's generally a lot more happening when danger is present in Reanimal compared to situations in LN. While a good amount of this overwhelming feel is due in part to the psychotic soundtrack of this game, I think they went a lot harder for the actual sounds here. The monsters in this game sound noticeably more distorted than in Little Nightmares, crashing into their surroundings with these horrifically crunchy thuds. I think the noises the monsters make play off the environments better than they did in Little Nightmares, making these sequences feel a lot more alive and guttural from top to bottom. The kids can't see what we see, so just imagine running for your life while you can only hear whatever beast is pursuing you, destroying the world around it. Now, I could be seeing differences where there really aren't any. Like I said, I'm not the greatest with sound, but this is just a pretty cool point I felt needed pointing out. The sounds of these games have always fascinated me, especially when they play around with the enormity of Little Nightmares' world. Particularly through these giant fans, man. I just love them. Both of these games end with this bubbly monster thing, enveloping your surroundings in one final poignant chase. Beyond just the visual similarities here, there's plenty of thematic overlaps across these two games' story thanks to this likeness. That overwhelming feel of entrapment through these things, along with them feeling more like forces of nature, lend the scenes themselves to a weird sense of eventuality, that somehow, some way, this was always going to happen, which fits quite well with the doomed narrative of either of these games. Along with this, it feels very righteous if you look at it a certain way. Mono is doomed to become the Thin Man, to inflict pain upon others as a result of an Ouroboros of betrayal, this flesh pushing him towards the final confrontation with his only friend. The girl must confront the reality of her world, and with it, the terrible actions of her closest friends, her spawn rushing to enlighten her. Having these things act as uncaring, powerful forces of nature which only push the protagonist towards the final revelation of both of these games makes for an incredibly interesting parallel. That these horrific, enveloping masses only serve to reinforce fate and revelation within these narratives. All of the kids across these franchises wear masks, or at least some kind of obscuring cover over their heads. Beyond just being a really cool design sync, it's easy to see how it slots in with the themes of both of these franchises. Children are not welcome in either of these worlds, with a distinct viciousness being aimed towards them specifically. Along with this, there's next to no room for any real sense of self in these worlds. Survival is everything here. There's no time for being a kid here because that'll only get you killed. It's either that or your want for comfort is used directly against you. All of this creates an inherent disconnect between your identity as a child in these worlds, and the masks reflect exactly that. If it's difficult for you to see anything, then there's less of a chance for you to get distracted by your own childlike wonder, leaving only room for that self-preservation so vital to these worlds. We love Bucket. This one moment up in the attic of the orphanage is, I'm pretty sure, the only example of the classic push a box off of an opening so you can progress puzzle from Little Nightmares. I'm not complaining that they largely shifted away from those kinds of puzzles, they were kind of just little time padders, but it's still funny to see this minuscule bit of Little Nightmares showing through in such a random, one-off way. For some reason, Tarsier has beef with the Lunch Lady characters. The Lunch Lady in Little Nightmares 2 was particularly close to completion and actually being implemented into the game, having been actually modeled and rigged, but was suddenly cut from the final product. While I do believe this was a tough, but overall good decision for the pacing of the schoolhouse, part of me has to question why exactly they try to go for round 2 in Reanimal. I know there's a Titanic-sized amount of concept art and ideas which never found their way into the final game, but I just find it really funny that the concept artist played around with the idea of another Lunch Lady character before ultimately deciding once again to can her. Maybe it was a sense of retribution which drove them as a result of the hefty scrapping of Alan 2's Lunch Lady, but either way, it's pretty funny. But wait. That word, retribution, that feels weirdly important to this conversation. Reanimal feels loved in a way that isn't visible purely through quality, even though that point is also undeniable. It feels loved in a historical sense. I believe that across all of Tarsier's work, one central idea has been the focal point. That idea is hunger, and Reanimal is the ultimate elaboration upon that studio-defining theme. Hunger is an incredibly interpretable term. Hunger can refer to so many different things and ideas, oscillating between the mundane, biological end to the more specific, ravenous themes of greed present within the modern world. This openness to interpretation definitely makes my belief difficult to concretely back up, but I believe it has enough roots and importance within the history of these games to warrant this encompassing of a claim. Little Nightmares, Reanimal, and by extension, even City of Metronome are games defined by the subject matter, the danger that either end of hunger can bring, and the pain people are willing to inflict on others to satiate them. How we, as human beings, are nowhere near as far from animals as we would like to believe. Across all three of Tarsier's franchises, you can actually see a sort of spectrum of hunger between old and new. That interpretability of hunger actually working quite well for the studio's favor, creating for a very distinct style across each one of their games beyond just art or tone dovetails. I just learned about this word and it's awesome. This allowed them to develop 3 entirely separate universes while still stressing an extremely important overarching story and idea to their audience, being especially poignant to the present day. The earliest draft of this theme actually resides within the Hope for City of Metronome. Of course, I can't speak very well on this topic. I don't work at Tarsier, believe it or not, so I have no idea what the game set out to be beyond its own in-development descriptions. But from what I can gather, while that game mostly didn't set out to disturb, that troubling sense of greed always stood at the center of it. A world controlled by one overpowering corporation, one which exploited the weak for their own gain to the most radical of ends. A corporation which valued power and satiation over basic humanity and the innocence of children. The corporation's power is not very hands-on from what I can gather. Instead, they enforce their smothering rules through hollow machines and people, courtesy of the anomaly which gave them power in the first place. This places a clear disconnect between those in charge and the enforcement of their power, and is very reminiscent of real-world commercial tyranny nowadays. This, as a matter of fact, would have likely been how the corporation would have eventually been overthrown by the game's end. The perseverance of human connection shining in face of a faceless system. From a definition standpoint of hunger, I believe this firmly quantifies the game as on the end of hunger for power. While that power certainly brings with it plenty of physical satiation like lavish food and living for those in charge, the primary catharsis for them likely lies in the sheer grasp the corporation holds over the city, which isn't too far from what reality looks like nowadays. From the very first personal project Tarsier ever worked on, the groundwork for a powerful moral stood, even if it never fully came to fruition. The first true original game Tarsier ever published was Little Nightmares, and that game, in a lot of ways, was the proper realization of City of Metronome. The clear similarities between art styles and character designs, and the more apparent callbacks like the gnomes and beginning Polaroid photo, evoke so much of what that game was lining up to be, just now with a darker atmosphere over the entire thing. The main element which was carried over being that motif of hunger. A concept so integral to the identity of this next game that it was originally going to be named after it. The systems of the Maw, in a lot of ways, feel like an evolution to the supposed plot of City of Metronome. This incredible, inconceivably large system which runs entirely on cruelty and indifference. Its only purpose being to satiate the needs of those in charge, and to exploit the unfortunate bunch at the bottom, particularly children. Except this time around, these systems feel particularly personal and biological, more ravenous than what the corporation looked to be. The network of the Maw survives off of gluttony, offering a place for guests and workers alike to indulge in their worst tendencies. An environment so devoid of light that anything that resembles it, such as a child, must either be exterminated or treated as delicacy. All of this psychopathy operating off of one keen individual. A woman whose selfish desires do not lay with monetary gain, but rather the relief of superiority. Concerned with the more professional, graceful answer gratification than the more immediate, physical side of the lower levels. The first game is just the perfect blend of either end of this word's definition, with both avenues of gluttony and greed being represented with startling accuracy. Little Nightmares 2 continues this trend, while also re-implementing a couple more elements from the remains of City of Metronome. You are thrown into a world controlled by a singular, featureless force of nature, where the only respite from the madness can exist through human connection and friendship. The monumental size of the Pale City also calls back to that game's world as well, but with both being visually altered and totally controlled by each game's respective sinister power. The viewers trapped in a perpetual cycle of distraction, just like the denizens of Metronome. There's no chance of escape for either of them, because whatever the signal/corporation feeds them is all they have. The advent of the duological protagonist is meant to be that hope throughout either of these stories, how human connection can eventually overcome a faceless force, be it with some thorns. It all definitely feels like retribution for the story they could never fully tell back in 2013. And playing through Little Nightmares 2 with this at the back of my mind just feels so much cooler now. I'd say that it's close to Little Nightmares 1 on the hunger scale, as I'm calling it, with a good bias towards the uncaring, greedy end of it due to the all-encompassing power the signal holds over the Pale City and less into focus on gluttony as a theme. Reanimal, I believe, is the final revision on this exact narrative. This game is defined by that ancient urge to satiate hunger. It's monsters being animals operating off of this intense instinct to consume. That same hunger which has encapsulated Tarsiers' work for the better half of 21 years, just now on a far more overt physical scale. As a matter of fact, it feels a lot like a realization for what was lining up to be hunger. Hunger looked to be a lot more intense of a game than what Little Nightmares 1 eventually came to be, and I think this was later remedied through Reanimal's sheer ruthlessness. Everything mentioned up to this point, from the environmental shift, alteration of camera style, and creature design, has all been in service of a particularly gross exploration of this end of hunger. The motif of animals as a whole playing directly into it, being gross, greedy exaggerations of nature, as if the cruelty we show towards animals has been directly taken note of and personified through these enchanted beasts. This world is plagued by an overpowering desire for survival. Everything in this game acts entirely in its own interest, a point particularly stressed through the soldiers, and by extension, the war itself. These people do not act like humans. They've been reduced, packaged into desolate, stiff-moving machines for war, ministers of death, icons of mechanization, so specially trained to shoot before thinking that anything that might pose a threat to them must be destroyed, including children. It, as a matter of fact, is very evocative of the robotic enforcers of City of Metronome. While with them acting as machines rather than conscious human beings with thought or emotion, it's either that, or whatever's left of their humanity pierces through, and leads them to only one conclusion, that death is better than this hell. These soldiers being the penultimate antagonists in the game about animals is no overlook, because you simply can't distinguish man from animal when viewing them in situations like this. It's the ultimate exploration of that end of hunger, stretching that biological definition out enough to encompass survival as a whole, while at the same time elaborating on that gap of power inherently associated with greed. That gap in power being explored in elements like the Sniffer's total control of the environment, the mother's army of children, the soldier's unfairness, and by extension, the unfairness of war itself. Whatever warranted it is entirely meaningless next to the utterly foul devastation of life it spawned. So much emphasis is placed on the sheer amount of power these forces hold over the orphans, from the intense viscera of the Sniffer's kill animations, to especially the care that was taken when developing the weapons of mass destruction present within the war grounds. Guns here are overpowering. You can't step out of cover without a plan for more than a second without severe consequence. You can also just feel the danger of firearms here. Especially so here because they're 3 times your size in this world. The superb sound direction of these things completely sells the tension carried across these last couple of chapters. And you only get to have influence here when you get to wield one of these special man killers. And it's just so horrifically authentic that the danger these ginormous, terrible cryptids carry would be surpassed by a mere man with a gun. It actually reminds me a bit of Amnesia the Bunker, and how in that game, being trapped with the beast is likely preferable to being planted on the front lines of war alone. But at least out there, your death would probably be instant as opposed to in here. That, and Reanimal as well, I think were loosely based upon stories of cryptids being sighted across world conflicts. That idea of legendary beasts being trumped by mankind's own devastation has always resonated with me. So seeing it pop up here again was just really amazing. Whoever commands this war is likely scantily affected by the destruction it brings, while those at the bottom are forced to bear the consequences, where eventually those same bottom feeders feel the need to stoop to their level in the hopes of a better future, which only yields an even worse world. A world ruined by selfishness, only to be fully killed by a fruitless sacrifice. At least, that's my interpretation of this game's story, which is absolutely up to dispute. However, that simply feels like the most narratively satisfying interpretation for me personally. However, I think it would be a disservice to leave Reanimal's story on that much of a surface level, rotten note. Something particularly idiosyncratic to Reanimal is actually the amount of sympathy and beauty some of its elements can contain. While Little Nightmares had a great deal of hope within its own narrative, it was usually quickly shot down. Plus, I also think Reanimal has an unexpectedly higher degree of it. Horror with hope, as it describes itself. I think this is an important point to be made, because so many people purely view Reanimal as just Little Nightmares but the devs stopped holding back. But it's so much more than that. We have to remember, the Little Nightmares universe was never tame. Built from the ground up to be a gross caricature of human life, with only a small silver lining shining through genuine human connection. For Reanimal, of course, creatures like the Sniffer act out of pure, premeditated malice. But others, like the Mother and the Brook Horse, appear to be acting out as a result of fear, territory, or other animalistic instincts. They're really no different than regular animals, it's just their physical alterations and power which give the notion of malice. Not to mention other silver lining moments like the Silver piano impro or these particularly beautiful areas which have yet to be ravaged by human influence. However, I think the primary sense of hope this tagline is referring to lies deep within the actual narrative of this game. On the surface, upon discovering the ritual and the consequences which came with it, you are led to solely view these children as the embodiment of evil, not unlike what 6 eventually came to manifest. However, I believe Tarsier is purposely playing on that exact preconceived expectation as a result of LN1 and 2. I believe that, unlike 6, these kids can be forgiven. Imagine watching your world be destroyed in the face of greed, and with each approaching day, the destruction only compounds thanks to the development of stronger and stronger machines for war. That'd drive anyone, especially desperate children, to any form of alleviation, even if the cost was ghastly. As we can see time and time throughout the game, these orphans do care about one another. They comfort one another in the most dire of situations, lifting one another up when they can't stand. Hell, the plot of this game entails you returning to this cursed island in order to save your friends and your own sister. Writing this ritual off as pure evil just doesn't sit right with me. Instead, I believe in that point I made earlier, that the primary point of Reanimal is that destruction like this can lead to those affected, the innocent, stooping to that same level of cruelty in the hopes of stopping it. I mean, it's kind of like the trolley problem if you really think about it. Only it backfires. Everything goes wrong, and now they're left to pick up the pieces from within either reality or some strange punishment realm many believe this game to be. All of this to say, I think this game doesn't have as much of a horrific conclusion as it initially seems. In a twisted way, the orphans accomplished exactly what they set out to do. The war is over. Everything is over. Now trapped deep within the belly of the beast. Maybe here, honesty can reveal itself. While it's almost certainly too little too late, maybe all they need to be content is some semblance of forgiveness from one another. The rationale behind their high crime, with the girl as the ultimate judge. At least that's how I interpret that vision of horror with hope. In a lot of ways, Reanimal actually feels like the final retelling of one continuous, looping story. From the misadventures of Tin and New against a hijacked world, to the 9-hour-long tragedy of the Little Nightmares series, Reanimal is likely the last time this kind of story will be told by Tarsier. It's pushed far past the content and mechanical limitations put in place in order to deliver the same grim fable, just now in the most visceral, topical light possible. The ultimate warning against our own destructive nature as human beings. The elements introduced, whether it be the twisted visages of animals or the unwavering brutality of war, all serve to be the apotheosis of an idea 21 years in the making. Reanimal, LN2, and City of Metronome are games defined by human connection in the face of evil. each game's exploration of this idea containing a different outcome, however. City of Metronome, safe to say, would have had a happy ending, with Tin and New overthrowing the corporation and looking towards a brighter future for everyone in the city. That's the standard favorable avenue for this kind of story to unfold through, ripe with hopeful sentiments throughout. Little Nightmares is where this concept's tone dims, however. Two friends discovering one another within a garbled, dangerous world. They venture off to destroy this evil, only for both of them to be corrupted in the process. That relationship poisoned, doomed to chase the gratification of revenge across Ouroboros. Reanimal is the final exploration of this particular story, where instead of both ends devolving into fruitless revenge, one side feels the need to betray the other. They believe they're doing it for the greater good, but as we can see, this act of violence only compounds the misery of this dying world. Where Little Nightmares 2 is a warning against revenge, this game is a warning against desperation. A warning against senseless survival, and a moral to never stoop to the level of evil which can be so overbearing in this world. Tin and New can look towards a brighter future. The tender moments between Six and Mono cannot be discredited in the face of their feud, and the orphans can learn to atone for their misjudgment. These stories certainly aren't free of consequence, but in the end, a powerful sentiment stands. To never give in to that ever-enchanting satiation of one's cruel hunger. To never let that heart of darkness take a hold of you and swallow you whole. And to instead show kindness under the most dire of circumstances. To grow, love, and maybe eventually forgive. To look towards a brighter future, despite it all. Of course, that's just what my personal interpretation of all of these games look like. That's part of what makes these games so engaging, that openness to interpretability. So, in light of that openness, feel free to pick apart my points and beliefs all you want. However, that's just what feels like what they intended across 21 years of evolution to me, personally. I absolutely adore both of these franchises. Little Nightmares was what truly cemented my interest in horror as a genre from such a young age. So take this video as sort of a love letter to the studio's work. These games have become such defining aspects of me as a person, and I simply felt a need to explore both of these worlds in such a comprehensive light thanks to that. Of course, I missed plenty of things here. I didn't even touch on the Brook Horse very much, nor the Stork-like at all, but honestly, I think I'm fine with that. He kind of reminds me of a shitty Zoocosis model anyway, but definitely still feel free to come to your own conclusions on what this video might have missed. There's just so many tiny little details surrounding these games that I really wouldn't be surprised if I didn't even manage to scratch the surface of it all. This video was certainly an undertaking. This has been an on and off project for about 5 months now, as you could probably tell from the quality fluctuation across this video, but it was still just such a good time making it, man, and I'm sure I'll do more like this, so subscribe if that piques your interest, I guess. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to check out my other stuff. It's pretty cool, I think.
Also, I realized that the first DLC for Reanimal came out with some pretty cool narrative implications.
Oh no, my game started lagging, bro. That means she's here. Yep. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god.
But that DLC was so self-contained within the world of Reanimal that I can't really relate it to anything else that Tarser has made. You know, the point of this video. But it's really funny that they coincidentally used the same exact gameplay gimmick as the first DLC for Little Nightmares 3.
This is my kind of really bad draft of an Amnesia the Bunker video essay I might still make. Sorry. Fredrik. And this is some other stuff I make. I might make a video essay on Dead by Daylight similar to this, but, you know, who knows. But, yeah. Thanks for watching.